Are you ready to make the most of your oil and gas mineral rights? Welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. Get the knowledge and resources you need to manage your minerals and royalties. Here is your host, Matt Sands.
Hello and welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Sands, and I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Williams, and we're here to help you make the most of your minerals and royalties. In this episode, we're going to talk about how to find oil and gas data for the state of Wyoming. And this is the next video in the series that we're doing on all of the major state oil and gas commission websites and how to use them to find information about your minerals and royalties. And Justin, as we were going through this before we hit record, I really like the Wyoming Oil and Gas Conservation Commission website. It's a little bit old school, but it has pretty much everything you need at your fingertips.
You said it, Matt, and it's linked easily so that you can get from one area to another and find the information that you're looking for. So no huge complaints.
Yeah, no major complaints. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and show you what that website looks like. Okay, this is what you see when you go to the Wyoming Oil and Gas Conservation Commission website. To go directly there, just type in wogcc.wyo.gov, and you'll see this landing page. And there's a couple of things we'll show you how to do, some unique resources that they have available for mineral and royalty owners, as well as the data site, which is where all of the magic happens, so to speak, how to find your information that you need to see. And if you're listening to this episode, be sure to check out the accompanying video on my YouTube channel. And we'll have links to the Wyoming website as well as some additional resources in the description below. So be sure to check that out. So Justin, let's go ahead and dive into some of the information they have for surface and mineral owners. So they have some pretty cool things here as far as frequently asked questions about royalty checks and the timeframes that are allowed under Wyoming statutes, inheritance, what do I do to get this in my name? How do I protest activity or find out information about hearings or wells? So they have a lot of this information that we're going to talk about today in a couple of different documents that you can see. There's also an oil field glossary, which I thought was pretty cool. If you have any terms you see in these files that you are not sure what they're referring to, you can go to this oil field glossary and then see what they're talking about. So Justin, I really kind of like that as a way to educate mineral and royalty owners.
You said it, Matt. This is not something that all states have, so it's great that they put that information together to help guide mineral and surface owners. And Matt, once you have that in your name, auditing your royalty checks, finding out production information, all of that's really important, like we've talked about before.
Yeah, that's all very important. So we won't go through all the information, but definitely check out these resources for oil and gas, mineral, and royalty owners because it's definitely got some useful stuff there, as well as information on how to navigate some of the sections of the website. So we'll just go ahead and dive into the data site. So when you first look at this, Justin, it's really sort of old school. You look at it, it's very tabular, text-based, but it actually works and it has the information that you need to find. And it has a GIS data explorer, which, for me personally, I like going to that as the first place to find information about my wells because it allows me to navigate on the surface of the earth and locate my mineral tract and then find out what wells are nearby. So, that is something that, will look familiar to many of you. If you have minerals in other Western states, they all use this same platform, this Data Explorer platform. Most recently, we did a video on Utah and they use the same technology. So pretty familiar to many people, I think.
You said it, Matt. And it links well to the information, which is available in the other sections, which really makes it easy to get from one place to another. Thank goodness.
Yeah, it makes it easy to navigate from the GIS once you pull up your well and they have like a main screen that you can kind of link everything together and you'll see what we mean here in a second. But Justin, in terms of why we need to go and find this information, there's a couple of key questions that always come up with respect to minerals and royalties. And first of all, it would be if you've just inherited the property, it'd be, okay, where is it located? Are there oil and gas wells nearby? Should I be getting paid royalties? These are very common questions that really every mineral and royalty owner needs to know how to answer those types of questions. And we're going to show you how to do that today.
You said it, Matt. And, legal description is usually the easiest thing for folks. And Matt, we have struggled just a little bit looking it up on the GIS viewer by the legal description. But do you want to kind of show how to get through that?
Yeah, and what Justin's referring to is they do have a search window here that does allow you to search by legal description, but despite my best efforts when I entered the township and range that we were looking for, it did not identify any wells. So something might not be hooked up correctly on that particular search window. It's okay because the state of Wyoming uses the rectangular survey system, so it's very easy to navigate visually. And if you're not familiar with survey systems, how to read a legal description, how to find your oil and gas lease or how to find your mineral deed to know where you own minerals, that is the first thing you need to know how to do. And if that is all foreign, what I'm talking about right now, you can find out more information. I have an online course called Mineral Management Basics where I walk you step by step on how to do those things, how to perform a title search to find your important documents and to organize them, and how to read a legal description, all the oil and gas terms, the types of interests, and all of those things you need to know as a mineral and royalty owner. You can find more information about that course at the link in the description below or in the show notes for this episode if you're listening to it on your favorite podcast app, or you can just go to mineralrightspodcast.com/courses. So, Justin, the first thing I want to say is we're going to be looking for oil and gas interests that are located in Converse County, Wyoming, Township 35 North, Range 70 West, Section 26. So I just randomly pick that. There's no significance to that particular legal description other than it is in an area in Converse County where there is a lot of oil and gas drilling going on. So we're going to see, hypothetically, let's say we just inherited this piece of property and we're maybe receiving royalties on a couple of older wells, and we want to know what's going on. What is the future for this interest? Is it likely that there's going to be wells that are going to be drilled? So we'll go ahead and visually find this on the map. Again, 35 North, 70 West. And what I'm looking at are these different township numbers you can kind of faintly see. And I'm just going to zoom in until I see 35 and 70 right here. You can see where my cursor is. And then section 26, which is down in the right corner here. And sure enough, there's actually looks like 5 horizontal well bores going through section 26. Looks like there are 5 permitted wells, which is awesome. So if we happen to have an interest in section 26, it does look like there's some of these black dots are existing producing oil wells. And we can click on the API number and it'll pull up the detail screen here. And within that, there's a link to the well file. So when you find your minerals and you find your well that you're looking for, that's what you're going to want to do is sort of click down to this data explorer. There's some information you can look directly here. You can view the APD, which is the application for permit to drill. In other words, the drilling permit. This shows that this well was approved in 1975 and spud April 22nd, 1975. So this well is almost 50 years old, Justin, but it still looks like it's producing.
You said it, Matt, and it's got good data in there. You can see all the information. And Matt, one of the first things you really want to look at is, do I own this? And can I confirm that it's running through my interest? And you talked a little bit about that, Matt, but this is also something we can confirm in this screen here.
Yeah, exactly. And we can look at you'd want to look at the permit. So what you want to do is click on the well file and it'll pull up this other screen, which is just additional details about this Gulf Federal #1 well. And it's operated by Matrix Production Company. You can click here to see, again, the permit information. There's historical card files. So this is a scanned version of this information you see on the screen. So before they digitized all of it, they used to write it on a note card basically and have it in a file drawer. And so then if somebody had a question about that well or update information about the well, they would go to that card and it would have notes on it and all these dates and that kind of a thing. You can click on this Matrix Production Company, see where else they have production, how many wells they operate that are producing or non-producing, that kind of a thing. It has information about offset wells and logs. So, there's geologic information. So if you wanted to dig into the geology side of things, it's all kind of at your fingertips, or offset production. It has the communitization agreement for this particular field. and it tells you how to search that. And that would be, because this is a federal lease, it tells you to go to the BLM website. And so unfortunately, it looks like you can't link directly there. So they tell you how to search for that information if you want to go and search for that file. Drilling activity. If it was a more recent well, they would have the spud date. They have lease information, lease production. You can look at all those wells. But one of the best things about the Wyoming oil and gas website is that you can link directly to production and sales data. So one of the primary things that you need to be able to do is to check that you're getting paid correctly. And the way you would do that is to look at your royalty statement and see what the sales volumes of oil and gas were for any given month and confirm that the same numbers were what was reported to the state. And one of the secret tips here that you'll see that there is production, which they have this kind of cool table view that you can look at how many barrels were produced in a given month, how many MCF of gas, how many days were that well was producing, the gravity, all those things. So you can look at that, the cumulative barrels, etc. And then you also have the ability to look at it on a graph, which is kind of useful to see, where they visually had that well shut in for a period of time. Maybe they were doing maintenance or some issue like that. But this well looks like it's kind of sporadically producing, probably towards the end of its life at this point. So if you had an interest in this well, you'd probably not want to bank too much on those future royalties. It looks like it could eventually stop producing. And especially with those other wells that are permitted, they may end up plugging and abandoning this well just so there's no wellbore integrity issues when they go and frack those new wells. But the cool thing is they also allow you to download the production data, which is awesome. And you can actually download the sales and production data into an Excel file. And let's say we want to get the production data for 2023 because we're checking our royalty statement. And what we're going to do is open that file up. All right. So now you can see in this particular well has the API number here, the well or lease name, the well number, reservoir, and then has the month. And this is again all for 2023. And you can see how many barrels of oil were produced and oil sales and gas sales. In fact, there were none, but it did look like that well was producing. So what that tells me is that oil went into the storage tanks on the well pad. And once it reaches some threshold, as those tanks get close to being full, then they'll bring in a truck and pump out the oil and sell it. And then that's when you would see the royalty check is actually the oil sales or the gas sales. In this case, even though that well was producing 3 months out of 2023, there was no oil sales, so you wouldn't have gotten a royalty check for 2023. So if we were to go back and want to look at another year, I think we need to go through this whole sequence again. Now, not as big of an issue with these larger shale wells because they're usually hooked up to a pipeline. And so it's pretty continuously producing. And as that well produces, it is directly sold into the pipeline. So you should see a pretty close correlation between production and sales for those newer wells. But just something to keep note of there. Okay, Justin. So what are some of the other questions that we might want to be able to answer using the Wyoming website?
And we've talked about production data. We've talked about establishing is there activity. How about the question of what is currently going on with the well? Maybe you were receiving royalties and then you stopped receiving royalties for a little while. And maybe there's some information to be gleaned as to what they're doing, or maybe they're reworking it.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of that would show up as sundry notice, and I think if it's not highlighted in blue, there isn't data there, so I don't think there's any sundry notices. That sort of thing would show up here in terms of the activity, and so you could click through this and expand these different things. Again, important things to have copies of are those commission orders around the spacing. So in this case, this well is on 160 acre spacing. And the reason I know that is by looking at this commission order from back when they originally drilled the well. It says 160A, so it tells me it's 160 acres, and we can confirm that by pulling up the PDF file, and it will tell you, yep, sure enough, that this particular section 26 in 35 North, 70 West, is 60 acre spacing units. And the way they would drill those wells is every southeast quarter of each quarter section, it'd be where the permitted location would be allowed. So 4 wells per section were allowed into this particular formation, in the teapot formation in this case. So this is useful to have a copy of for this particular well, so that if you were going to calculate your decimal interest, you'd have to look in that quarter section, how many net acres you had in that quarter section. That fraction multiplied by your royalty rate would be what your decimal interest should be in that well. We go into how to calculate your NRI, your net revenue interest in a well, in episode 3. So go and check out that episode. Again, we'll link in the description below where you can go and look at that information and learn how to calculate your decimal interest in a well. So that's really important. And again, you would need a copy of that commission order along with things like your deed, your oil and gas lease, your royalty rate, and then it allows you to put all that together to figure out what your decimal should be. In other words, what the fraction of the oil and gas that's produced, how much of that should be paid to you. So that is a key thing to know how to do. So Justin, as we were first looking at this well, we clicked on a couple of these old vertical wells, but the real punchline to all this is the fact that there are 5 permitted horizontal wells in this section. And the first thing I would want to do is pull up that drilling permit, and also to pull up the plat. That's always a key piece of information, right?
Absolutely, Matt.
So let's go ahead and do that. Looking at the well file for this one, we can look at the permit to drill, and it will download, and I'll pull up the file here. Okay, so here is the well file for this particular well. It was permitted on July 14th of 2023. So looks like this permit is still active. Hopefully they will drill it here this year. Has information like the well number, the federal mineral lease. In this particular case, the minerals are federal, surface is fee. So, from a fee mineral owner, in other words, private mineral owner perspective, this would be the federal government, but it's the same information. If you had fee minerals, that's where you would have an interest in those as a private individual instead of the federal government. But it's, again, the same information here. So we'll just go ahead and show that. And what we're really looking for is that plat map like we talked about. We have to scroll down. So it looks like it goes through the entire part of this section. So down in section 26, and then going north all the way up to the top of section 23. So this is a 2-mile lateral, roughly 9,989 feet long, it looks like. And again, because each normal section is 1 mile by 1 mile, you can kind of eyeball that and see this is a 2-mile long horizontal well. Now, the important information is, you can look at each of these wells, how many of them actually go through section 26. Now, at first glance, Justin, looks like 5 wells that go through section 26, and then there are wells from that same well pad that are going to go down through section 35 into section 2 of 34 north, 70 west. First glance, I would say, we probably don't have an interest in those, but we would need to do a little bit more digging to find out for sure.
You said it, Matt, and that's the usefulness of this to the mineral owner, is you're really confirming that, okay, this does in fact run through the part of the land that you own. It can be pretty deceiving without really diving into it, Matt.
Yeah, it can be deceiving. And then the most important thing in states that allow statutory pooling like Wyoming is what acreage is included in that drilling spacing unit. Is it just section 23 and 26, like these 5 wells that are shown in these first few plat maps? That would be the first thought. Those wells that actually go through my mineral tract, those are the only ones I would have an interest in. So we can go and double check that by going back to the well file, and we would need to look for the commission orders. And in this case, I'm going to go back to the last one here. It looks like there are orders that cover the Niobrara Formation, the Parkman, the Turner, and the Mowry. So this is a potential situation where they're going to drill into those very different formations that are stacked on top of each other. And that is useful. It does look like it has the same size of a drilling spacing unit. This one's 2,561 acres. So that tells me that that's actually 4 sections. So let's go ahead and look at this particular drilling and spacing unit. And again, pull up that PDF. All right. Well, looks like this 2,561.51 acre drilling and spacing unit for the Mowry Formation in 35 North, 70 West, Section 23 all, Section 26 all, Section 35 all, and Township 34 North, Range 70 West, Section 2 all. So this tells me those 4 sections that are stacked on top of each other with 5 wells going to the north, and I believe 5 wells going to the south, that if you had an interest in Section 26, you would actually have an interest in 10 of those wells. Now, to figure your decimal interest in that drilling spacing unit, you would need to know your number of net mineral acres and divide that by 2,561, and then multiply that by your royalty rate to figure out what your decimal interest is. Again, assuming you had an interest in this Section 26. So from this standpoint, it looks like you'd have an interest in all of those wells, which wouldn't be apparent at first glance. Typically you look at, okay, that well goes through my tract and I would only have an interest in that well. But again, you have to dig a little bit deeper, where there are states that allow for pooling of different mineral acres together, and they pool the different interests together, even if the well doesn't go through your mineral tract. So that's kind of an interesting revelation in this case, Justin.
Yep, absolutely, Matt. You said it. And it really helps to kind of figure out what conversation you should be having, and like you said, about what ownership you may have. Matt, this also be great to see that you have these permits, and as a mineral owner, you'd really be watching to see if they're going to start activity on this, and when they might do that.
Yeah, and that's sort of the last thing we'll want to look for. And we can find that again back in the well file. And that's kind of the hub, as you've sort of probably seen as we've been going through all of this. With Wyoming, it all is pretty much linked through this well file, which is very helpful. And once you find your well, you don't have to go to a different database to, like we were looking at in Arkansas, where they had the map database for the lithium areas. And so you could have certain information there. But then when you wanted to go look at your well information, it was another database, another link on the website that were not connected. And so you'd have to go bounce around to these different websites, repeat those searches over and over. In this case, once you've found your well, you can go to the APD file, you can download all of the records from one spot, look at your commission orders, all without having to go and do those additional searches. So, Justin, the question you asked is, has this well been drilled yet? And based on what I'm seeing here, it doesn't look like it, because what you would expect to see is a spud date and have a date there. And so in this case, that's totally blank. I don't even see an indication, anything related to when the well was spud. And again, this is just a funky term that we use in the oil and gas industry for when they start drilling a well. You can look at that in a couple of different ways. You can look at the last reported status down here. It says AP, which tells me that's an approved permit. It would be, again, if we looked at some of these other wells, PO tells me that's a different status. And if you wanted to look at some of the different statuses of those wells, you can see here, based on the icon, producing oil. So PO is producing oil. That tells me from that old vertical well there. So producing oil well, and the fact that it does have production, the production status date shows that it's producing as of 12 of 2023. So those 2 pieces of information there would tell me that, okay, that well's been drilled, it's producing, or it's not producing, maybe it's waiting to be drilled. And again, you'd have this drilling activity information showing up if it had been drilled. So again, from what I'm seeing with this particular horizontal permit, it doesn't look like it's been drilled yet. It looks like as of, again, April 8th, 2024, this well is still permitted. We're waiting for a rig to show up. And so hopefully it's on Anadarko, now Oxy's drilling schedule for this year. And so you just need to monitor that. Justin, there's a couple of different ways you can go about doing that, keeping track of when wells are permitted and stuff. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, Matt, there are some really great tools now that are available, and we've talked about it a lot before, Matt, but Mineral IQ is a really great tool that was put out by Enverus, which is a really large company in the oil and gas industry. And that's a way that you can set up alerts and get notified if there is new activity on your land. And that makes it easy for mineral owners, where previously we've had to go out and be proactive about looking for this information.
Yeah, previously you would have to come back to this website, periodically look at the status. Has it changed? Are they drilling it yet? With Mineral IQ, it'll give you alert when there's a well that is permitted, or if a rig shows up within 2 miles of your interest. So that's a great way to sort of proactively keep track of this, get an alert going, and then do more digging, and then go into the Wyoming oil and gas website at that point. And then you can look at these additional fields and look at the different documents that are filed. Maybe there's a sundry notice that talks about when they plan on completing the well, like we've talked about with some of these other state agencies, that you can find that information. So they are a past sponsor of the show, not a current sponsor, but I use their product as well. So it's definitely something to check out. So Justin, what other questions? Anything else that we need to look at? Or are we pretty good? Are you feeling pretty good if you had minerals in this particular area as far as the information we know now?
Yeah, Matt, we've done pretty good at going over the information. I think one last thing that we can mention would be, if we're not going from the GIS viewer start point, there is another way from the commission's site, if we go to the data site here, that we could enter in the legal description and then get API numbers for the wells. Matt, do you want to show that as just a different way that you could start that initial point on the GIS?
Yeah, that's a great point there. There's this area of review. You can do the legal description, like Justin mentioned, section 26, 35, and 70. And we're just interested in this one section. If you don't click that, it'll tell you all of the surrounding sections as well. But yeah, if we want to just find for section 26, this tells us some of the same information that we just saw visually looking at the screen. And again, it has the different orders from the commission. Again, we can see that there was originally a 160 acre spacing order in the Teapot formation. And then now, most recently, in the Turner, Niobrara, Mowry, and Parkman, they have 25 61 acre DSUs, at least in what looks like the Mowry, Niobrara, and Turner are that. And then it looks like maybe the Parkman is just 1,280 acres. So again, that's something we'd have to pull that order up and look at it to be sure. So that would be something to look at. And then as you go through and want to dig a little bit deeper on these wells, you'd want to know what formations they're going after. In this case, at a glance, we can see these are mostly Niobrara, and then there's a couple of Turner wells. And again, looking at that spacing, that tells me that all of those wells would be something we would have an interest in, because both the Niobrara and the Turner are spaced at 2,561 acres. And then federal lease information you can see here. So kind of everything at a glance, with the links to those different well files that you can go to, which is very helpful. So that is another way that's kind of the direct route to the well file. If you didn't want to have to navigate that map each time, this would be a little bit quicker way to go and find the information you're looking for.
You said it, Matt. And we were talking before we hit record here that Wyoming really offers some interesting information that other states don't offer through their data system, like geological reports and some other interesting things. Do you just want to kind of quickly fly through that, Matt, for the mineral owners that might be interested?
Yeah, that's a good point. And in this case, it doesn't look like there's a whole lot for these wells, these new ones. But if we were to go back maybe to this older well, the Gulf Federal here, there's geological markers. So this is useful because if you had a lease that had a depth limitation, for example, so we said maybe to 100 feet below the teapot. So that would tell me that goes down to 7566. So any wells that were drilled below 7666, 100 feet below that marker, that you would need to have the operator come to you to get another lease. So some best practices is, if you have a well that gets drilled, is to put a depth restriction in there. And so those are some different clauses you can put in your lease, working with your attorney to really get strategic and limit the formations they're allowed to drill from that particular lease. And what it means is basically they'd have to come back to you and then release your acreage again for those deeper formations, pay you another lease bonus. Hopefully you could even negotiate better terms at that point. So again, having this type of information, like the geologic markers, you'd say, okay, well, where does the Parkman Formation fit relative to the Teapot? My current lease is limited to the Teapot. They're permitting wells in the Parkman. That means I need to go and follow up with that operator and say, hey, by the way, you guys need to lease that deeper formation. You don't have a lease right now in that deeper formation. And so most of the time you'd get a notification before you even found out about those permits. They would have already reached out to lease. So that's another thing. One of the other things, Justin, we talked about before we hit record is this confidential well status. Do you want to talk about what that means?
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. That was news to me. It's not something I heard of, Matt, but it's a way for the operators to classify the well information as confidential. And Matt, you did some research, and that's a 6-month period where that information is just not made public.
Yeah, exactly. And the intent of that was so that if you have a new well in an exploration type play, that there's not a lot of other wells drilled, you're going out there really pioneering, that you get a little bit of a competitive advantage for 6 months, that the well results aren't released to the public. In other words, all the other operators are going to be very eagerly looking at the Wyoming Oil and Gas Commission website to see, okay, this new formation that this other operator is going to explore, we think this might be good too. They just drilled a test well. How did it do? Well, it gives them 6 months to hold that confidential. So in other words, the Wyoming Oil and Gas Commission will not publish production data, will not publish some of these other records like logs and things, I believe, for that 6-month period. It used to be that pretty much every well was classified as confidential. So operators would come in and say, oh yeah, this well over here is confidential. And they would just use it as a way to try to limit access to that information. The commission got wised up to that. This is about 10 years ago, kind of the beginning of the shale revolution. And so they said, you can't do that for every well. Has to be a legitimate exploration type scenario. Or if you're like testing that formation in an area that hasn't been drilled yet, then okay, maybe we'll give you that confidential status. But yeah, it doesn't look like this well is confidential. That would show up here in the information. You would see the status and whether or not they would be publishing information. So that could be another reason if you get a well that has been drilled, that started producing, you're looking for, I want to see what's this well doing. If it's confidential, you might not see production for 6 months, and that would be why.
Another thing I thought, Matt, that was well displayed on their end was close to where you find the geological marker information. There's a change of operator list here, and it makes it pretty simple to see who bought and sold this well and what years those were, which is as great as a mineral owner if you're trying to figure out who you need to be talking to about your ownership and royalties.
Yeah, that's a great point, Justin. That is under change of operator here. So you can see the history, who originally drilled the well, and then all the different operators in the history. And the reason this information might become useful, let's say you inherited this interest. I have a client that I'm working with that had this exact situation arise where her mother inherited minerals from her grandfather. And so she's working with her mom to try to figure out, okay, what royalties should have been paid to you because you inherited these interests 40 years ago, but you've never been paid royalties. So we have to go back and look at who are the companies that had operated these so that when we go and search for, funds that have been escheated to the state or whatever, we can see, okay, this operator reported royalties that should have been paid to you, or maybe it's still in the grandfather's name. And so that's how you can kind of track back over time who should have paid you royalties. And, you can figure out how much based on the production during those years when they operated the well. So that's information that's useful, and you can find that all here as well.
All right, Matt. Well, I think we've covered just about most of the essentials. And again, overall, Wyoming makes it pretty easy to get this information, and even some more obscure information that you don't always see with some of the other states.
Yeah, it's great. It's definitely a little bit older as far as the interface goes, but the information is there. It's generally accurate and up to date. So great resource if you have minerals and royalties in Wyoming. And be sure to check out the show notes, which as always can be found at mineralrightspodcast.com. And again, be sure to watch the video, which we'll link to in the show notes as well. So thanks again for listening. And thanks again, Justin.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks so much for listening to the Mineral Rights Podcast with your host, Matt Sands. Don't forget to subscribe and share at mineralrightspodcast.com. The Mineral Rights Podcast should not be construed as investment, legal, or tax advice. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy.